Hey wonderful people, are you like me waking up to the story of snakes in space? We've all heard about snakes on a plane, but now the snakes seen from the ISS in space. And here for you is video footage of a genuine, live, living, 8-foot snaky thing filmed out of the viewing window of the International Space Station by Story Musgrave.
Dr. Story Musgrave is a veteran of 5 American shuttle missions who has seen and photographed several unidentified flying objects in space. Dr. Musgrave does not believe they are craft from another planet.
On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It is rubbery because it has internal waves in it, and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. Some incredibly primitive, more primitive, some just proteins coming together, amino acids, and some just single cellular organisms. And other civilizations have been around for a million years that are doing unimaginable kinds of things.
Wow, what is that? Is it really a snake? It doesn't make any sense. The height of the ISS, why would there be a living creature in space? Now, the chances are it's a bit of space debris that happens to have a wiggly motion, but supposedly it really does look like a snake. In a social media interview, this guy said some very interesting things about what he and others have seen in space. Let me quote from him. "The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there that sort of brings you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there." He goes on to say, "Some incredibly primitive, some just like proteins coming together, amino acids, and some just single-cell organisms of other civilizations that have been around for millions of years can be seen in space doing remarkable things." That is, I'm wordless, I'm speechless. That's an amazing quote from a very senior astronaut, possibly the man with the most hours in space and multiple doctorates in science. What is it that he saw? I've no idea. Let's discuss it in the comments. It could be a genuine snake that somehow has been blown up into our upper atmosphere and then gone into orbit, and it would of course be dead, but it might still be moving due to it orbiting at the same speed as the ISS, possibility number 1. It could, of course, be, as I said earlier, space debris, a piece of rubber or hose or something from another satellite that just looks snake-like because of its motion and somehow was in orbit with all the other space junk around the ISS. But what Story Musgrave implies is that somehow, and it's interesting that he says amino acids and single-cell creatures. You wouldn't see those with your eyes, so maybe the NASA are taking samples from their place in space, from the ISS, and finding weird beasties in their samples. He doesn't really say. So, of course, the other thing is, if it is an alien snake, it would have come from our solar system. Well, I don't think, it's not well known that there are snakes on other planets in our solar system. But of course I could be wrong. The only other possibility is that it's an interstellar snake. You know, that somehow it has come into our solar system from an alien nation across the distance of space and is flying along wiggly next to the ISS. I think that's kind of unlikely, but very interesting. My question to you today is, do you think that Story Musgrave and NASA have got samples of weird wee beasties that they've collected from the outside of the ISS up in space in our upper atmosphere, because ISS is actually a low Earth orbit object. Objects, living creatures, roadkill from space, would get captured by Earth's gravity and orbit Earth in possibly the same height as the ISS, and with a Scoopy thing they could be taking samples of what they're finding flying around outside. I think that is very intriguing. But if they have found evidence of alien life up in space flying around the ISS, why hasn't NASA published it to the rest of the world? I mean, they spend millions and millions and millions going to Mars looking for petrified stuff that could have lived on Mars millions of years ago. But if there's actual evidence flying around Earth that they've scooped up from the ISS of living creatures, probably not snakes, but as Story says, single cells or chains of amino acids. You see, that raises such a big point as well. Would aliens actually have chains of amino acids? I don't know. I personally believe in the highly strange. Any contact with aliens would be so different that we wouldn't necessarily even recognize them. And I digress. The other day I did a film about human perception, how we are living in a Goldilocks zone of incredibly narrow senses. And we categorize everything. Okay, close your eyes. Let's do an experiment. Close your eyes. Now open them. What do you see? Haha, what you see, you immediately in your brain named. In my case, I saw my e-bike, a framed picture, my iPad, other things around the room, bricks, a light. I put everything into a word. Words are our brain's machine code to put in boxes everything that we understand so we can make sense of our reality. A classic story that one of you wonderful viewers shared with me after that film went out was the story that when Cortez sailed to South America in these big rigged sailing ships with horses, the natives who were living in South America looked out at sea and saw these giant wooden vessels with sails and these silver-suited men riding these weird four-legged creatures, and ignored them because they didn't have a word, they couldn't describe them, they didn't compute, so they were effectively invisible. And I think that is a big clue to how we might perceive the highly strange. If you were walking down Basingstoke High Street and you saw such a strange thing out of context in the middle of the high street, a strange alien wearing a silver suit riding a creature that you'd never seen before, and behind the alien was this giant craft with sails, you would probably ignore it, or your brain would go, I have no idea what that is. I don't have a name for it. I don't have a word for it. And it would be effectively invisible to our perception. Now, we might feel scared, as I would, but we don't really know what it is. And that's why I think people who've had encounters with the highly strange, as logged by the wonderful Jacques Vallée, they don't really know what they've seen. They feel it as an emotion. It's not really computable by the human brain. So in my humble opinion, those highly strange do not compute events are what I'm very interested in. The aluminum flying saucers, slightly less so. But back to snakes in space. Story Musgrave and I actually worked together. We worked together on a fantastic film. He was the chief astronaut on the final shuttle mission to fix the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, the Hubble Space Telescope was fatally flawed from launch because it was actually a spy satellite that they'd repurposed, and it was never designed to point into space, but that's a well-known story. But other things have gone wrong with Hubble, and over the years they managed to fly up and fix it. Now, of course, that was the whole purpose of the shuttle, that it could have the Canadian arm and grab spy satellites, put it back in the hold and bring them back to Earth or fix them in space. That's exactly what they did with Hubble. It's a good example of what they were doing for the NRO for spy satellites. So how did it work? Well, they opened the clamshell doors of the Hubble Space Telescope, thin aluminum doors, and inside they could slide out modules on rails and change the whole camera or change the whole processing board, slide it in and close the doors and come back to Earth. Well, they'd done that twice, and now it was truly broken. Things inside the Hubble that were never meant to be fixed, circuit boards deeply embedded in the walls that can't be fixed. They practiced for months underwater in a swimming pool because the real problem of changing components on a board was they're really small and they're going to fly off into zero gravity, and they have to have some kind of catchment system. You can't have bits flying around inside the Hubble because it would break it. So the mission went well. We worked on a film for Discovery that gave all the astronauts cameras. It was a nightmare, but that's a different story. Maybe I'll tell you that one day. But at the end of the mission, they succeeded to change all the individual components from the hidden boards, and Hubble supposedly was going to work again. And it was Story Musgrove's job to close the clamshell doors. Now, these are really thin, and they have 5, I think, latches. Click, 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 click. And you have to get them all shut. Now, he closed 4 of them and found that one of them wouldn't close because the door was slightly not aligned. It was bent. It just needed a good bending to put it back into alignment to close the latch. NASA said he wasn't allowed to do that because something would break. So they asked NASA at Houston Control, do you have a solution to fixing the last latch? While Story was out there floating around in space going, I could fix this given a wrench, but I'm not allowed to. I'm just going to hang around. When he got this great communication from a crew member on board the shuttle who said, hey, Story, we're going to be in radio blackout. All your telemetry from your helmet camera and communication is going to be cut off to Houston for 2 minutes, coming up in about 5 minutes. Maybe you could use that time to fix it. He went, yes, all right. Tell me, he says, when we're in radio blackout. So the crew member says to Story Musgrave, okay, they can't see or hear you now. Story gets a come along, he describes, and a wrench and bends the door and closes the hatch. Excellent work. They come out of radio blackout and Story Musgrave says, Houston, this is Story Musgrave, over. Click. And Houston goes, yes, go ahead, Story. Story, I fixed the door. I managed to close it. Houston, whoa, that's amazing. Congratulations. Your mission is complete. Go back into the shuttle. Top man. Okay, so that really happened. Story actually bent the door and managed to get the final latch closed. And we were doing a film about it. And of course, none of that was recorded by Houston, but it was recorded by Story Musgrove's helmet camera, which was recording to a digital device or a tape. And when we were making the film, of course, Story told us this story and we wanted to include it. And NASA said, no way, because it's not our protocol. But I was in contact with the NASA chief film librarian who kept on sending us requests of stuff that NASA had for our film, like the takeoff and various other cameras that we didn't have from the crew's DV cameras that they were filming the film for Discovery. And they wouldn't send us Story's helmet camera because it just wasn't their protocol. On the very last day of the edit, I remember I was putting my coat on. We were going to transmit it to Discovery Channel. I get an email from my NASA contact, the librarian, who said, hey, Simon, here's a few shots that you might like. In it was Story Musgrove's helmet camera of him getting a come along and a wrench and bending the door and closing the hatch and going, done it. And it really made our film. We spoke to Story about it, and Story Musgrave is fantastic. He really knows what he's doing. He's really experienced. And if Story Musgrave saw a snake in space, I believe him, because the truth is out there.